firstly, Jack, thank you very much for having the chance to come and speak to you and talk about your expertise with our audience. Before we get started, I guess, can you tell us a bit about your background as an entrepreneur and the work you do with the Entourage?
Yeah, it's funny, you know, my business career, I suppose, started at the age of 8, and it didn't, but it did in that my parents ran an organisation called Breaking the Cycle, which was a not-for-profit organisation, and these guys would take long-term unemployed youth off the street, put them through a 3-month program, and then put them into employment. And they were the most successful job placement agency for long-term unemployed youth in the country. You know, they'd put through about 6,000 kids a year, and we would have a few of them living with us and all of that sort of stuff. So at a very early age, I learned that there was things happening in the world which required my attention more so than the stuff that I was supposed to be learning at school. Government then, you know, being a not-for-profit organisation, the government then pulled the funding and the organisation collapsed. And, you know, they were a not-for-profit organisation, but in terms of size, I think they were doing about 16 mil a year. Organisation collapses, 6,000 kids a year now not getting the services that they used to. The people that were living with us that became my brother and sister, you know, moved out and all of that sort of stuff. So not only did I learn that there are important things that I think need to be addressed in the way we raise young people, but I also learned that if you want to make an impact, in my view, it's a lot easier and more effective to do that if you can do it with a commercial nous. So today what we do with the Entourage is it is a for-profit organisation that is designed to educate the next generation of entrepreneurs. So whether you are a business owner in the startup phase, whether you're an organisation in the growth phase of business, or whether you're a seed stage person looking to start a business, what we do with the Entourage is we connect Australia's best entrepreneurs with these, you know, entrepreneurs under 40 to give them the education, the support and the resources required to help them develop and build high growth businesses.
Fantastic. And so the philosophy behind the work that you do, can you tell us about that and your business values?
Yeah, well, the business philosophy behind what we do is about empowering people to live life on their terms. You know, we started the Entourage because we kept getting feedback from entrepreneurs around the country that there was no place to go to find real business education that works, delivered by people with been there, done that experience. So we decided to do a bit of market research on it, and this is when I was running another organisation called MBE Education. And so we did some market research on it, and what the market told us was that people that had been to university had rated their university a 3 out of 10 in terms of its effectiveness in preparing them for the business world. So that highlighted a gap in the education model for us and said that something needed to be done to better enable people to start and build great businesses. You know, I think our generation, I use the term loosely, but, you know, people from, let's say, 20 upwards, I think our generation is quite an entrepreneurial generation in that we're impatient, in that we push for change. You know, we don't resist change, we don't accept change, we push for change. We want to be at the top, and we want to be at the top in 5 minutes, and we believe we can do it. And we've grown up looking at magazines where, you know, it's no longer rock stars on the cover of magazines. Today it's people like Richard Branson or Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Steve Jobs on the cover of magazines. So I think we've got a generation that's quite entrepreneurial, that has lacked and continues to lack on a large scale the education required that enables them to go into business for themselves and start to build great companies. So that's the philosophy upon which we started the Entourage, and the values of with something like the Entourage, we don't offer qualifications, and we never will. In order to offer qualifications, you need to become accredited, and in order to become accredited, it sort of dilutes the curriculum in a way. So we don't offer a piece of paper, what we offer is an education. So the value that we deliver is we give people the ability, we help people to develop the ability to build and sustain and manage multi-million-dollar businesses.
Brilliant. And you know, no business is without its challenges and struggles along the way. What are some of the biggest challenges you faced as an entrepreneur in business?
Yeah, well, you know, I was lucky that by the time I started the Entourage, I'd already had a couple of successful businesses. So I was able to sort of self-fund the Entourage, and that really, really helped. In terms of the early days, some of the lessons I learned, because I went into business myself at the age of 18. I didn't know what an invoice was, and I was a managing director of a business-to-business call centre down in Melbourne. So I knew nothing, and And worse, I thought I knew everything, and I didn't have a high degree of talent when it came to business. So I stuffed up for years and years and years and years and years. You know, I reckon that in business, although I don't advocate going to university, I do advocate education. And whether you do that through formal programs, whether you do that through online, or whether you do that through trial and error, your apprenticeship will go for about 3 years if you want to start a business. It's just that the apprenticeship isn't done through university or TAFE. It's a self-driven and self-initiated apprenticeship. For me personally, the lessons that I learned as I was starting were the main thing is to adopt a focused approach. Too often, particularly early stage entrepreneurs, we look at like a Richard Branson, and he's lying on a hammock in Necker Island running 400 companies from his Palm Pilot. He's worth $8 billion, and we go, yeah, I could have a crack at that. And we try and start 6 companies, which is exactly what I did as a young person, right? What a lot of people forget is that for the first 10 years, Branson had 1 company in Virgin Records. He sold it for $1 billion, and then he started to diversify. So I think the main thing for me was firstly adjusting my expectations as to how quickly I would become successful, quote unquote, and secondly adopting a focused approach in terms of what I was doing.
Yeah. So many business experts stress the importance of focusing on one thing and niching. At the same time, many entrepreneurs struggle with finding what that one thing is in order to specialise. So what tips do you have for entrepreneurs who are starting out, who might not know what area to focus on, and how early to actually start niching?
Yeah, I think that, you know, what I've learned is that sometimes the most commercial answer isn't the most commercial answer. You know, if you asked a highly commercial person that answer, they'd say, you know, do some market research, identify a gap in the market and go to address that, which is the correct commercial answer. However, I think the commercially smart answer to this question is you have to find something that you love, and you have to find something that you care about and you're passionate enough about that you will fight for through that 3-year apprenticeship where you're not making any money and not going forward and not progressing at the rate at which you might have thought you were going to. So I think number one is, if money wasn't an issue, and this is completely non-commercial, right, but I think it is. If money wasn't an issue, what would you choose to do? Would it be technology-based? Would it be people-based? Would it be arts-based? Would it be a particular industry? Is there a particular skill set or a particular message that you have? And I think firstly is tapping into that. If you can then package that and marry that to a genuine demand in the marketplace, then I think that is what builds great businesses, is when you've got a founder who is genuinely passionate about what they do, that also finds a gap in the marketplace that they can fulfill. That is, I think, the sort of the yin and the yang that builds great businesses.
Yeah. And a lot of the innovations and business ideas that we see are based on really practical ideas or practical problems that people have just solved, you know, to do with daily life. So that leads to, where do good business ideas come from? And I guess for you personally, how do you go about finding ideas and pulling them together?
Yeah. So to answer the first question, I think good ideas come from consumers. If you were to start a restaurant, you know, if we were thinking, okay, I'm going to start a restaurant in a week, what is the most important factor for that restaurant to have? Now, we might say great staff, we might say great menu, we might say great food, we might say great location. I'd argue the number one thing that will determine the success of your restaurant is, have you found a hungry crowd? Because if we can be genuinely addressing a gap in the market, then we'll get traction a lot quicker than if we're just a solution looking for a problem. So I think, you know, the paradox I outlined earlier in terms of starting with you and what you're passionate about, and then marrying that with a genuine demand in the marketplace. The second part's really important, also is the first part, right? But without either of them, if I've got the passion but there's no demand in the market, then I might be able to build a lifestyle business over a period of time, but it is probably not going to be the level of market demand or the size of market demand required to build a significantly sized business. On the other hand, if it's purely a market opportunity and it's purely a commercial play but we're not passionate about it, then we might run out of steam along the way because it's not congruent with who we are as a person. So the great ideas come from when the founder has a passion and they marry that with the consumer that has a need, that's where a great idea is bonded.
Mm-hmm. And what's your take on, focus groups, surveys, questionnaires? Because there's a lot of debate about the reliability of that information and whether customers always know what they want.
Yeah, well, it was Henry Ford that said, had I have asked my customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. It was Steve Jobs that said, it's not the consumer's job to know what they want. And I agree with both of those statements. So I think that I do believe that business owners do not spend enough time getting to know their consumer. I hold a belief that if you are in a business and you are in an industry, you need to know that consumer better than they know themselves. And that might sound like a little bit of exaggeration. It's not. You can genuinely know that someone's buying patterns and their motivations for buying and their fears around buying better than they do, because you obsess about it 24/7, whereas it's just something that they do once a day or once a month or once a year. So you need to get into the mind of your consumers, and you need to learn about your consumers better than they know themselves. And we do that through focus groups, through speaking with them, through talking with them, through surveys, through Google keyword tools and Google Trends, and all of this sort of stuff is how we learn about our consumer. But it was once said to me by a mentor that if you look into all of that sort of stuff and then don't wrap your own innovation around it, then we're just being intellectually lazy. So I think all of that holds a place so long as it serves to inform your innovation as opposed to replace your innovation.
So what do you think makes a very strong, compelling value proposition, also known as the USP?
Yeah, I think in terms of value proposition, the main way to nail that, there's two ways. Number one is you have to be different, meaning what makes you different or better than where I'm currently going to have that problem solved. We need to stand out in today's marketplace. It's not enough anymore to be credible. It's not enough anymore to be professional. It's not enough anymore to have good quality. You need to have those three things, but that's not enough to win business anymore. That just gets you a seat at the table. So number one is you need to differentiate yourself. The second thing about a good value proposition is that it shouldn't focus on you as the business owner or the business. Your value proposition shouldn't focus on the product, it shouldn't focus on the outcome of the product, but it should focus on the effect that has. So if you're a personal trainer, your value proposition is not that you have qualified personal trainers. Your value proposition needs to be that you can enable people to lose weight faster than they ever have before, or whatever it might be. But you need to take it a couple of steps further to what effect and how do we change people's lives for the better, and then we wrap a value proposition around that needs to be different to what everybody else is saying.
You often talk about the importance of failing fast in business. Can you tell us more about what you mean by that and why failing is so critical for success?
Yeah, totally. I think that failure, particularly in Australia, has negative connotations to it. Failure, we are taught, is something to be avoided. You get the answer wrong, you get a cross, and it goes, your marks come down. I think in life it's kind of the opposite. I think that because in business there is no rule book, there is no playbook, there's nothing that we can follow in order to go, yes, this is particularly if we come from a corporate world where we have a manager, where we have, there's probably several levels of management, we've got KPIs, we've got systems to follow, we've got all of this sort of stuff, we've got structure. When you go out and become a business owner, all the structure falls by the wayside. Now you can provide yourself some of that sort of structure, which you should do. But I believe the best and most efficient way to learn is through getting out there and trying. And this is particularly true in the early stages of business, because in the early stages of business, if we're trying to find that marriage between what we're passionate about and what the market wants, how do we determine that? We determine that by the friction in terms of what happens when the rubber hits the road. Meaning, we go to market with a product, or we go to market with a marketing campaign, or we go to market with a whatever it is, and we figure out what doesn't work, we bring it back in, change. We go to market, we figure out what doesn't work, we bring it back in, change. We go to market, figure out it doesn't work, and it's that constant period of iteration. It's my belief, and this might sound a little bit wacky, but it's my belief that the measure of success for a business in the startup phase of business is not necessarily how much money they make. Yes, it's a scoreboard, but that's not the first determinant we should be looking at. The first determinant of success, I believe, is your rate of learning. Because a startup business is just a temporary organism designed to find a viable business model, meaning we don't know what that viable business model is yet, particularly if we're doing something new. So the only way to find that viable business model is to launch, figure out what doesn't work, bring it back, is to iterate as fast as we possibly can so that we do find that viable business model as quickly as possible.
And in that process of, I guess, prioritising different ideas and avenues and testing, many entrepreneurs face the challenge of whether to quit an idea altogether or to keep persevering with that idea. So, how are they supposed to know when they should either keep going or quit an idea and keep testing other ideas?
That's a really, really good question, and I don't have the answer. I think there's instances where you see people give up too soon, and too soon could be 2 or 3 years. I didn't start making money in business for 4 years. So had I quit after 3.5 years, I would have been quitting too soon. And on the same token, some people don't quit when they should. They might have been in the same business for 5 years. They're still not achieving the level of revenue or profitability or customers or impact that they're looking to have. But they're still doing it despite iterating and trying to find a viable model and surrounding themselves with mentors and advisors and all of that sort of stuff. So if you're at the point where you don't know whether you should keep going or not, I would seek the counsel of experienced entrepreneurs. In my experience, if you seek the counsel of your accountant, they'll tell you to quit. I remember being like months within profitability and our accountant going, "You guys are in trouble." And we weren't in trouble in the slightest. This is a couple of businesses ago, but in fact, it was quite the opposite. Like had we have needed to raise money at that point, I could have demonstrated a very strong investment story to any investor coming on that had an investment background or a business background. So accountants and lawyers probably aren't the best people to tell you whether you're whether you have a viable business idea or not. So I'd seek the counsel of successful entrepreneurs and get their informed opinion as to whether you should give up, A, whether you should iterate, B, or whether you should keep doing what you're doing and just persevere.
What are the top 3 business mistakes you see entrepreneurs make, particularly in the early startup stage of their business?
Really good question, because I think we make a lot of mistakes in the early stage of business, because that's the point, we should be making mistakes, right? I think the first thing is lack of focus, Particularly early stage entrepreneurs love chasing shiny things, and it's not until you just try and master one thing and try and become the best in the world at one thing that I believe that will become successful. Otherwise, we're just trying to spin too many plates and it's all too hard. A general rule of thumb might be until one product line or until one business is profiting 20 grand a month, 50 grand a month, whatever it might be, depending on the person. Until a business is profiting, we've got a rule in our businesses, until one business is profiting $1 million, we don't start another one. Because you shouldn't yet. I've never known anybody to start 2 businesses at the same time successfully. I've known people to start one business, get it successful, then go into the next, but not concurrently. So I think focus is really, really important. I think the second thing is that, and I was certainly guilty of this, right, so I'm kind of just reflecting on my own experience, is often we don't surround ourselves with people with experience. We don't surround ourselves with people we can ask the dumb questions to. As a business owner, we're constantly wearing the mask of confidence, strength, certainty, because you have to. You have to be a leader for your staff. You have to be a leader to your clients and your customers. You have to rock up to media interviews and all this sort of stuff. And we're constantly wearing this mask. One of the most important things in business, I reckon, is to surround yourself with people with been there, done that experience. Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you, who can help you navigate the early stages of business, and you can leverage off their mistakes, leverage off the experience of their successes, and get answers literally in 50 minutes that might have otherwise taken you literally 5 years to figure out by yourself. So leverage off people with been there, done that experience. And number 3, I think, is looking at what matters. I think that particularly in the early days, we can sometimes get caught in things that don't matter as such. And this sort of comes back to the focus principle around figure out what's the 20% that you need to do and manage and monitor in order to enable the success of the rest of the 80%, and just focus on that. You know, media is great because it will get your brand out there and it'll get your name out there, but it shouldn't take up 80% of your time. Revenue is a good thing. Is it equating to profit? Or have we got a business model where we know that it's going to be tracking along and our revenue will, you know, will kind of be breaking even for a couple of years, but we're building a solid foundation and eventually our profit will continue to rise where our costs will plateau because we're investing in the foundation of the business. You know, what is the play here? Are we trying to be profitable from day one? Are we trying to build a good infrastructure? Or are we just trying to get users to one day sell and we don't want revenue? Whatever the critical factors are for you, whatever the critical metrics are for you, you need to identify them, you need to project what you expect them to be, and then you need to measure them every single month against what you expected them to be, to notice, are you falling short, are you overachieving, and if either of those are true, why is that happening? Because it's only through providing ourselves that structure and that measurement that we hold ourselves accountable to what we should be doing. Without that structure, it's really easy for business owners just to coast from month to month and never really have a true, honest, objective perspective as to whether we are succeeding.
Yeah. In terms of growth, you've had a dramatically increasing, particularly Facebook following with over 18,000 fans at the moment. What do you think has been key to your success of growing a very viral brand?
Yeah, I think the key to growing a viral brand is to realise that the world has changed, right? We're no longer in this era of interruption marketing, which is stop, listen to me, buy from me. We're now in an era of relationship-based marketing, which is let's form a relationship, and then if we need to have a discussion about doing business together down the track, that can sort of happen. So how do we achieve that building of relationship? You know, a friend and mentor of mine, a guy called Simon Reynolds, a very successful Australian entrepreneur, once said to me, Jack, regardless of what business you're in the business of education. Yeah, now it just so happens that I'm in the business of education, but regardless of what business you're in the business of education. And I'll give you an example of that, because the point is this: what does your customer need to know, and how can you deliver what they need to know in a fun and educative or an entertaining kind of a way that speaks to them? Because if you can do that through videos and through posts and through pictures and through books or through ebooks or through whatever, then you'll be hugely successful. One of the examples, you know, that I've seen recently of that is a company based here in Sydney called Shoes of Prey, which is co-founded by a superstar, you know, entrepreneur called Jodie Fox. And these guys were releasing a high heel, and don't quote me, but I think it was, you know, it was really durable, yet comfortable, yet stylish. So instead of sending out an email to their database or doing a marketing campaign that we've got a high heel which is durable, stylish and comfortable, which is so rational and doesn't really excite anyone, they did like this really cool 4-minute video which started with Jodie down on the steps of Bondi putting on the high heels, and she's in her fitness gear, and you're kind of going, why is Jodie in her fitness gear putting on her high heels on Bondi? And the reason is she was about to run from Bondi to Bronte in her high heels to prove the durability and the comfort of what they were. So it just sort of shows the highlights, and she gets to the end and pulls the shoes off and no blisters, and then I think, you know, the very end of the video tells you a little bit about the shoes. So she's educated her market, she's done it in an entertaining way, she hasn't done it in a rational, boring way, she's done it in a way which has cut through the advertising that her competitors are probably paying for, and she's built relationship because she's done something crazy and irreverent that builds brand and relationship. So I think the main thing for brands, if you want to cut through and you want to go viral and you want to do all of that sort of stuff, is to stop selling to your consumers, particularly on social media, and start educating your consumers. And not educating them based on what you want, not educating them based on you or educating them based on your business, but educating them based on what they need to know. So that might be, if you're in finance, that might be, they need to know how to manage their finances. So how can you start to educate that through videos or whatever? If you're a personal trainer, how can you start educating people on what they would usually pay for? Start giving it to them early on, because when they make a buying decision, the business that is front of mind is the business that has contacted them the most recently and the most frequently. So as entrepreneurs, we need to be asking, how do we keep contact with our prospect on a regular basis in a way which entertains them and educates them without necessarily selling to them? And if you can do that, then you'll build relationship, you'll build trust, and then you build this thing that we call brand.
And I guess that leads to my next question about the difference between, particularly in the online tech startup world, the difference between brands that catch on and stay versus those that quickly come and go as fads, but still manage to get a huge audience but then slowly die away. So what's the difference, do you think, between those two different directions, and what can entrepreneurs do to make sure that once they've got that winning idea, how to keep reinventing themselves?
Yeah, and there's a perfect way to ask the question, because the answer is within the question, and that is you have to keep reinventing yourself. And this is another really interesting paradox, right? Like, I reckon there's so many paradoxes in business. Like, you've got to be this, but you've also got to be this, and they're complete opposites. Or you've got to do this. An example of that is you need to stay true to who you are. You need to know your message. You need to know your market. You need to know your values, and you need to stay true to that. The contradiction to that comes into it in that you need to reinvent yourself, probably on an annual basis, in order to stay ahead of your consumers and stay ahead of your market and stay ahead of your competitors. So find out, who is your business at its heartbeat, and then how can you reinvent yourself on a regular basis to continue wowing your target market, but in a way which stays true to you.
What do you think makes a sticky brand?
Yeah, so the second thing that I think really enables you to build a brand that has longevity is message. Meaning, we need to have a message that speaks to our market, right? And the message can't be, we've got a durable high heel that's 20% off. It needs to be a message that speaks to the hearts and minds of your consumer, which, as I said earlier, that brand did really, really well. In order to nail message, I think we need, as entrepreneurs, we need to ask ourselves two things. Number one is, what do you stand for? Yeah, what do you stand for? What do you say about your consumers? Because if I'm sitting behind an Apple computer, I'm creative. If I'm drinking a Red Bull, I'm an adrenaline junkie. If I'm drinking a Boost juice, I'm youthful. If I'm driving a Mercedes, I'm successful. What do you stand for, and what do you say about your consumer? The second thing to nailing message, I think, is who have you picked a fight with? Or maybe what have you picked a fight with? Yeah, Jamie Oliver, who's a billionaire, Jamie's picked a fight with the fast food industry. Michelle Bridges, who's a super successful sort of thought leader and brand in Australia, she'll do $67 million this calendar year. She's picked a fight with fad diets and exercise plans. At the Entourage, we picked a fight with the traditional education system that we think is antiquated and ineffective for educating business owners. Steve Jobs picked a fight with complexity. He'd say, you guys are making things too difficult, doesn't need to, let's fight for simplicity. So message is about marrying two things. Firstly, what do you stand for? And that should come from your market and a marriage to what are you passionate about, what do you genuinely stand for. And then number two, who or what have you picked a fight with that enables people to rally behind your cause.
And Jack, who was your biggest role model and why?
Role models really tricky for me, probably because I've always had a lot of role models. It was Isaac Newton that said, if I've seen further than others, it's because I stood on the shoulders of giants that came before me. And I don't know if I've seen further than others, but I've certainly stood on the shoulders of a lot of giants, I started a business called MB Education 6 years ago with a guy called Reuben Buchanan who single-handedly changed my life. These days I've got an incredible board, and I spend a lot of my life with people that just inspire me and push me and make me laugh every single day, and that makes me incredibly happy. And then I've got people that I really connect with on a business level and a personal level, people like Peter Davison. Peter was one of the seed funders, was the first seed funder in PayPal. He invested at a valuation of $500K, and then PayPal went on to sell for $1.5 billion. So he's a very successful venture capitalist from Australia, but operated in the States for a number of years and made some successful and not successful investments. And what I love about Peter is that I think great mentors, if you want to call them that, and I just kind of look at them as friends, right? But great mentors and peers, the best will always encourage you to listen to you before you listen to them. Yeah. A mentor that's kind of not that great will go listen to everything I say and just do it word for word, right? I don't think there's a lot of wisdom in that. I think that a great mentor should say to you, I'm going to tell you my view, I'm going to tell you my opinion, I'm going to ask you some really hard questions. but I only want you to do what's going to be right for you. I want you to put it through your filters and then apply it. And they should challenge and enable your thinking more so than they give you the benefit of their thinking, right? And so Peter Davison just challenges me and pushes me and brings out the best in me, which, you know, is an easy sentence to say, brings out the best in me, but that's what a great mentor should do.
Yeah, so it's about more the questions than always the answers that they've got.
Yeah, that's right. You know, Mark Boris, you know, had Kerry Packer as an investor for a number of years when Mark was building Wizard Home Loans. And he says, you know, I'd meet with Kerry on a regular basis. And he says, Kerry's the best and the worst business partner anybody could have. The worst because he was always at you and always demanding more, and the best because he was always at you and always demanding more. And he said, all Kerry would ever do was ask me questions. So again, I think there's wisdom in having mentors and advisors that ask you the right questions and, most importantly, bring out the best in you.
And do you have any favourite books that you've read that you'd recommend to entrepreneurs?
Yes, I do. Again, my favourite business books probably aren't very businessy, but I reckon that successful businesses start with successful people. My number one book is a book called Conversations with God, and it's not a religious book. I'm not a really religious person, but it's quite a spiritual book, and I think it helps you understand yourself. My second favourite book is a book called Talent is Overrated, and it looks into the greats of history, and it asks the question, how much of a part did talent play in achieving their level of success? And when looking at these case studies, the book determines that talent, being a natural aptitude in a particular field, does exist, yet in achieving high level of success it does become irrelevant. It more comes down to how hard you work and how much you learn. And then the third book, which I'd recommend, is a book called Do the Work, which is a super short book. You know, I listened to it in audio, 90-minute audio book. And it's all about how we as entrepreneurs will often face resistance, which is whenever we're in a creative endeavour and we start with a blank canvas and we've got to build this business from nothing. You know, it talks about you will be faced with something called resistance, which is that voice inside your head which says, you know, you're not good enough, or you're not qualified enough, or you're not ready, or you should go and do this first. Or, you know, it's that voice inside your head which deters you from starting. And it just says that voice is always going to be there, regardless of how successful you become, and you just need to act in spite of the resistance and act in spite of the voice inside your head which tells you probably shouldn't. So I think those three books, you know, if you could encapsulate all of those principles and really embody all of those principles, you'd find yourself with a person that knew themselves, that dedicated themselves to ongoing learning, wasn't afraid of hard work, and understood that there's always going to be a bit of self-doubt and self-dialogue going on, but that's an entrepreneur that's going to act in spite of all of that, which I reckon is really exciting.
Yeah, great. And you mentioned that that voice inside of our head, also being fear. Fear definitely is a huge roadblock for many people, not just entrepreneurs. How do we, I guess, what's your advice for overcoming fear and pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zone?
Yeah, I think that it's a really good question in terms of how do we overcome fear. And Oprah Winfrey said this in one of her last episodes. She said, regardless of how successful you become, that voice inside your head which tells you you are not good enough will never go away. And you know, she was America's first self-made female billionaire, and this coming from her, right? So I think overcoming fear is really just about acting in spite of fear. You kind of don't overcome it in that it never dissolves. It will always be there. It might get smaller and the voice might become a whisper, but it will always be there, and you just need to act in spite of it. And if you can do that, then sometimes it's the fear of failure that will drive you to act. Fear is a good thing, provided it causes you to work faster as opposed to not work at all.
Yeah, I like that, doing it in spite of the fear. I guess that way it's not as much of a fight, you're just acknowledging it, but doing whatever you need to anyway. Yeah, and the voice will always come up, and I always just say, piss off, I'm working. And I just stick to task, you know what I mean? And it like, I think smart people have moved on from the days of, you know, well, okay, so you've got some fear and you've got some resistance happening here, well, you know, let's label that as self-sabotage, and tell me what your relationship was like with your mother, and tell me what your relationship was like with your father, tell me everything that happened to you. Don't worry about all of that. All of that's in the past.
the voice will always be there. Accept that, get on with it anyway. That is the best psychological lesson I think I've ever learned.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. So many successful people incorporate daily rituals or habits for success into their everyday lives. What are some of your daily rituals that keep you on track?
Yeah, really good question. With regards to daily rituals, I think that it's so important that every business owner, no, every person understands what are the small things that make you happy, right? And you need to be consciously aware of that, because it's the stuff that when you're not busy, you probably do. You know, it might be going to the beach, it might be going away for a weekend, it might be spending time with loved ones, it might be spending time with your partner, it might be reading, it might be learning, it might be doing nothing, it might be meditating, it might be exercising, whatever it is. And it's the stuff that we naturally sort of attract toward when we're not busy. What happens is we then get busy and we don't stop doing all of that sort of stuff, and then we wonder why we're not happy anymore. So I'd call it like the basics of just being yourself and being happy, and identifying what is your strategy for happiness. You know, for me, I know that I need to see the ocean is a massive sort of rejuvenator for me. So I probably need to go to the beach once a week or once every couple of weeks. I need to spend a weekend in the Blue Mountains by myself, probably every quarter, and I write in a journal and I go for walks and I do all of this sort of stuff. And I need to exercise. So I know that regardless of how busy I get, you know, the weekends in the Blue Mountains need to be scheduled into my 12-month calendar every quarter for the next 12 months. And we need to book those in, right, so that they're there. I know that I need to book in time to go to the gym, you know, because it's another, it's an activity which makes me effective, no different to having a board meeting or having a staff meeting. Going to the gym is equally as important. So whether it's daily rituals, weekly rituals, monthly rituals, whatever it is, be very consciously aware of what your rituals are and make sure that you ritualize them into your calendar so that particularly when you get busy, you continue to do them.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you have any final tips or advice for entrepreneurs that are viewing?
Yeah, I think the main tip for any entrepreneur, particularly young entrepreneurs, is to ensure that you are an independent thinker, meaning the voice inside your head should be louder than all of the voices outside of your head. If you are entrepreneurial by nature, you're probably like in 1% of the population, right? Every single person is different. Therefore, you know, if you're sitting in a room with 100 people and you're one person, particularly if you're entrepreneurial in nature and therefore different to the other 99, then they're going to have different views, different opinions, different approaches, different things that make them happy, different rituals, different strategies for their happiness, different approaches to their career or their business than what you will. And it's so easy sometimes to be drowned out by that noise and start to think, well, maybe I'm wrong and everybody else is right. And I think the main thing is to realise that provided it is true for you, then that is right for you. So, you know, if you are taking a different path than to, you know, the 99% or the collective, if you like, if you're taking a different path, just be aware of that, be aware that you're slightly different in your approach and embrace that. And even take that one further and take that one step further and surround yourself with people who are similar to you some of the time so that you can sort of complement one another. But realise that you're different to everybody else on the planet and stay true to who you are and make sure that you are an independent thinker, not buying into the status quo or the general consensus, because that's the fastest path to mediocrity.